Hello everyone, welcome to day 20, last day for our speaking practice. Let's complete the part 3 that is pending now and we'll move on to practicing some more. Let's see what we can cover in part 1 of day 20. So let's start.
Move into our explanation of speaking part number 3 and highlight some of the tactics and strategies that are necessary to do well. So in general, in terms of part number 3 as an overview, the timing, it will take about 3 to 5 minutes to complete this section of the test, so you got to be ready. The purpose, the examiner is really looking for you to reveal the depth of your thoughts. They want to know how well you can really use the English language with these complex, thought-provoking questions that they're going to ask you. Finally, you will only have about 3 to 4 discussion questions, and then the test is over. The examiner is going to review their notes from your performance on all 3 parts. Now, here is some more general information about part number 3. It happens directly after part number 2. Also, it's going to be on the same subject as part number 2. If part number 2 was about foreign languages, then part 3 would be about languages. Also, the question types are different than part number 1. In part number 1, the questions were very direct. In part number 3, the questions are much more complex. They really ask you to really speak in abstract terms very often. If you really want to score well on part number 3, show that you can handle talking about abstract concepts and using abstract vocabulary. That's going to really, really impress the examiner. Now, the 3 main question types that you're going to have for part number 3 will deal with an opinion question. Should parents be required to take classes before having children? An imagination question. What do you think child rearing will be like 50 years from now? Or even a compare and contrast question. How do parents today compare with parents in the past? All right, in part number 3, here are some tips and advice that can be very helpful to you. Now, as opposed to part number 1, in part number 3, you can clarify. You can ask the grader, can you say that question again, or can you clarify what you mean by that? Also, this has applied to all 3 parts. Please use topic-specific vocabulary. That's very, very important. Recognize when there are tense changes. Sometimes in part 3, they'll ask you a question about the past, and you have to use the past tense. And then in the very next question, they'll ask you about the future. Make sure you pay attention and keep really good eye contact, because this is a discussion, which means that the examiner can jump in and ask you a question. So you have to look at their body language and know when they want to ask you a question. So you need to wrap up your answer. Also, to do well on part number 3, constantly explain why. Every answer deserves a why, and that follow-up explanation deserves a why. You explain why. You give examples. You give alternatives to what your answer would be, to really explain and extend your answers out. So here you're going to see just an example of the kind of language that might be involved in a part 3 response. Now, I really think that maybe this response is a little bit on the long side, but what I'm trying to do here is just really just give you a lot of language that you could possibly use. Typically, for part number 3, you're going to use 3 to 4 sentences. Okay. Now, I'm not going to read through these right now because I'm going to do that in a later video. Right, and also here, if you want, you of course can stop the video right here and read through this language on your own. Okay, so I hope that you were able to really learn from that in terms of a brief overview of part number 3. In the next few videos, I'm going to give you some sample answers to speaking part number 3. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk. All right, in this part 3 sample answer, we'll be looking at a culture question, or looking at some culture questions. All right, first question. Can you learn about a different culture without knowing the language? Yes, I believe it's possible to gain knowledge of an outside culture absent any background in their language. When we think about culture, we have to consider clothing, food, music, art, and architecture. In this day and age of the internet, we are all able to watch cooking shows about Korean cuisine or utilize YouTube to view dance and dress performances in Ghana. This can occur without speaking Korean or Twi. Last week, without speaking Chinese, I learned traditional Chinese medicine from a TV documentary. What will languages look like 50 years from now? That's difficult to answer, but if I had to guess, I'd first say that we will have less languages in the future based on what I recently heard on television. A CNN report linguist commented that almost half of the languages are endangered. In addition to that report, we can clearly witness how English has become the favorite language with ESL schools growing in popularity. So, after detailing all of this, I would have to say that we will likely maintain maybe 5 to 10 languages by 2070. What is best to learn first, a language or culture? It depends on if you're trying to master the native tongue or customs. Overall, I think that learning a culture first really aids in grasping the concepts of a native vernacular. When studying a way of life, you can come across lots of vocabulary on topics ranging from cuisine to clothing, which assists with later language education. Very often, when absorbing a dialect through reading, the content will have vivid descriptions, and having background knowledge of traditions will aid in that understanding. Is it possible to write and speak as a native speaker? I have two different answers when considering native ability for writing and speaking. Regarding writing, yes, a language learner can perform equal to or exceed the skills of a native speaker. Writing is based on grammatical and lexical rules, which second language students can master at the same level as an L1 writer. Now, the spoken word is an entirely different story, where certain nuances in terms of intonation, word stress, sentence stress, and chunking, a non-native speaker just can't grasp completely. Right? Now, in purple, we have a lot of the fluency language that's highlighted. Here you see a lot of great vocabulary, native tongue, native vernacular, a way of life in terms, instead of saying culture, cuisine, clothing, dealing with culture, language education, dialect is really good vocabulary, traditions is good for culture. Here we have a compound complex sentence we're using that really raises the level or raises your level on the rubric. Regarding writing, great way to start a sentence out. Grammatical, lexical, second language, L1, intonation, word stress, sentence stress, chunking. You're hearing a lot of vocabulary that's going to be very impressive to a grader. In the previous question, the previous questions, let me go back for a second. Here we have some really good language also. Gain knowledge instead of learning, absent any background, meaning without culture. Here we have good parallelism, clothing, food, music, art, architecture. In this day and age, is great fluency language. When we think about it, is great fluency language. So this is what you want to be able to do. Also, it's perfectly fine to start off like this. That's difficult to answer, but if I had to guess, that is great fluency language. In addition to that report, that means I'm extending and explaining more. That adds to the fluency score. Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to joining you in the next video. Okay, now let's move into the Part 3 decisions answers. This is the companion to the Part 2 decisions question. Here we have a young man who's making a decision. He's making a decision right there. What skills are necessary to make good decisions? Off the top of my head, a couple of attributes come to mind. One being an ability to think outside the box. This would enable you to look at a problem from angles that were not previously considered. Also, arranging a pros and cons list, as well as having a deep knowledge of self, will provide considerable aid in coming to a particular conclusion. Last but not least, vision and examining worst-case scenarios help reach rewarding decisions. Do parents in your country allow children to make important decisions? Normally, Ghanaian parents involve themselves in major resolutions that concern their offspring. Because Ghana is more of a collective culture, it would be a rare occasion when a child could control their fate solely on their own accord. If this were the USA, children would be given such freedoms, but in Ghana, this attitude is thought to lead to poor outcomes due to lack of wisdom. Right? Of course, in red we have really good vocabulary that's related to the question, thinking outside the box, pros and cons, knowledge of self, vision, worst case scenarios. Last but not least is great fluency language. Off the top of my head is great fluency language. Normally, great fluency language, major resolution, synonym language, offspring, synonym language, control their fate solely on their own, make their own decisions, synonym language, conditional sentence, outcome, synonym language. Do you think parents should make important decisions? Do you think parents should make important decisions for their children? Do you think parents should make important decisions for their children? Okay. All right. Based on what I just said about Ghanaian parents, yes, all major resolutions should be controlled by a parental figure. Some argue that preventing children from deciding their fate detracts from their ability to make determinations later in life. When you think about it, this line of thought cannot be more wrong, because wisdom leads to good resolutions, and this wisdom is only gained by allowing those that have it to take the lead on significant decisions that need to be reached. All right, so here is really good fluency and coherence language, because I'm really connecting back to the previous sentence. And here we have great vocabulary, major resolutions, detracts. Determinations means like decisions. Detracts means taking away from. This line of thought, this type of thinking, really great language. Okay, so make sure that you add this language into your own answer choices. All right, and thank you very much. Okay, in this part 3 sample answer, we're going to be addressing the mobile phones question. This is a match to the part 2 mobile phones question. All right, first question. Do young and old people use mobile phones the same way? Young adults and their elders distinctly utilize high-tech cell phones in regards to purpose. Youngsters tend to heavily rely on the latest social media, such as Snapchat, TikTok, or Instagram, whereas those who are 40 and up focus mainly on SMS or older social media like Facebook. Generation X and Y purchase a new phone just for the camera, so they are definitely more into the picture capabilities than the baby boomer generation. Right, there we have a lot of vocabulary that's great for you to be able to use. Baby boomer generation, Generation X and Y, 40 and up, youngsters, elders, young adults. I'm really trying to just highlight in this one vocabulary. What are the differences between writing letters and text? Well, the contrast between these two concepts come into play first with considering the length of what is written. You would never write a 1,000-word text message, whereas personal letters can easily reach that word count. In addition to the length, we can also see differences in regards to personalization. What I mean by that is letters have your distinct handwriting, which makes it unique, while a text message is devoid of that identifying marker. And actually, this last sentence should be, what I mean by that is letters have your distinct handwriting, which makes them unique, while a text message is devoid of that identifying marker, because we said letters. Some mobile phones are annoying. can you give examples of how this might be the case? I can definitely speak on this topic. And I'll start with the rude people who have no idea that they are shouting unnecessarily into the phone and thereby disturbing the peace of others. I can remember this one time in the bank, and this woman was literally speaking as if she were yelling across the street to her friend. Another irritating habit that comes to mind is when a person keeps looking at their phone during a personal conversation. I find this to be quite offensive and off-putting. I'll mention one more maddening ritual, which is scrolling through social media during a company meeting. All right, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, now we're going to give a part 3 money sample answers. All right, so this question is related to the part 2 question that was talking about paid for work. Okay, do young and old people use money the same way? As we age, our stinginess with money becomes more evident. What I mean by this is that the older generation starts to think about their mortality and desire the preservation of wealth to enjoy their later years. In a completely different fashion, young adults don't think they are on death's doorstep, and as a result, they frivolously spend money without regard to the future because they expect that there will always be tomorrow to recapture what was lost. Why do people care about money so much? Basically, the typical adult has been programmed through movies and advertising that their lives will be meaningless without stacks of cash. Simply put, we've been brainwashed to believe that money equals power, despite having examples throughout history of the opposite being true. To be honest, as Biggie Smalls said, more money equals more problems. Whether that is true or not doesn't matter, because the messages taught at home and by society dictate that money is the be-all and end-all. Right now, in both of these responses, you have a lot of really great fluency language that's in purple that you can use. We also have some really great vocabulary in red. Here, I'm really focusing on the fluency and the vocabulary, because if you're going to be impressive, you want to have great fluency and have great vocabulary. Preservation of wealth means being able to hold on to your money. Death's doorstep, great language, means that you don't think you're going to die. Frivolously spend means to be wasteful with your money. Brainwash means somebody's taking over your mind. Stacks of cash, really good idiom. Money equals power, really good phrase. We have another quote there by Biggie Smalls, more money equals more problems. Because, of course, is really good extension language that helps with fluency. Simply put, really good fluency language that really connects to the previous thought. Should children be taught how to manage money? Definitely. At home and school, children should receive financial education. To tell the truth, lack of financial literacy leads to professional and personal unhappiness later in life, to such an extent that government officials should mandate that students from age 8 to 18 learn the ins and outs of money management. In fact, I'm successful today because my parents demanded I sit through Saturday classes that provided education on money matters. Again, we have really good vocabulary, financial education, financial literacy, money management, and this one should be in red here, money matters, right? All really great. That when I say subject-specific vocabulary, that's what I'm talking about. All right, and thank you very much for joining us on this sample answer. Okay, in this video, I'm going to give you a part 3 sample answer. This one is connected to the part 2 swimming question. All right, so first question, should swimming pools be free? Ideally, swimming pools or any other sport facilities would be provided for free, but actually, I support charging for entrance. If residents don't pay when using swimming pools, governments will depend upon public spending to cover staff, salaries, and upgrades. This money is better spent on more meaningful activities, such as helping with underprivileged children in after-school programs. Anyway, entrance tickets to the pool are well within the ballpark of what the average Joe can afford, right? In purple, we have our fluency language. In red, we have two sets of idiomatic language within the ballpark and average Joe. We're using a compound sentence. We're using a conditional sentence. So really, we're showing a lot of skill in this answer choice. Next, is it important to learn swimming? Not only is swimming a necessary survival skill, but also a relaxing leisure activity. Hence, it would be both advantageous and stress relieving to learn the art of swimming. Every summer, heartbreaking accidents related to water incidents occur at swimming holes and beaches around the country. And most of the victims lack swimming skills or were never taught. Strictly based on safety reasons, non-swimmers should learn to swim. Okay, who is the perfect person to teach people how to swim? Well, those who go through lifeguard training or were formerly swim team members know techniques and swim at an expert level. So, a swimming athlete would be ideal, but I doubt they're easily located. Swimming has some risky elements that need to be taken into account. So, to manage unexpected situations, such as cramps or drowning, a teacher should receive medical training to improvise quickly upon emergency. The aforementioned lifeguards have this ability. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me go back for a second and just touch on a few things before I close out. We definitely have some really good subject-specific vocabulary: lifeguard training, swim team member, swimming athlete, cramps, drowning. All of that is really good language that really adds to a grade. Well, of course, is really good fluency language. Need to be taken into account is a really good phrase. If you can use phrases like that, it really impresses the grader. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to sharing another sample answer with you. Hi there. In this lecture, I'm going to be giving you an example of how to answer the questions in part 2 and part 3. Now, what I'm really going to be trying to show you is how to use the speech-to-text software that they have in Google Docs, because it's a great way to be able to get a record of what you're saying, and you can look back on how you can improve your grammar and your word choice or your lexical ability. Also, you can check your pronunciation, because if Google Docs is able to recognize the words that you're saying, that means that you're able to really pronounce them very, very well. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to go through the exact same process that you would go through. I'm not going to be using a prepared script. The question is going to come on the screen. I'm going to take notes on the question, and then I'm going to shift to Google Docs and use Google Docs to provide my answer, right? So I'm going to give my speech in a natural way. So I'm not going to use at all a prepared script. The reason why is sometimes people say, well, write something down. That's not the way you speak. Okay, that's not the way you speak. And I want you to hear a natural given answer by a native speaker, because we make mistakes too. But we have to be able to self-correct the mistake that we make. And I want you to know that to be able to get a score of 9, it doesn't have to be perfect, because nobody just speaks perfectly, right? So you're going to, of course, in your practice set A, the next part after this introduction, of course, will be they're going to cover. I'm going to cover the instructions for you in terms of looking at the screen and so forth and so on. I'm not going to get too much into that right now. When you play your practice, you'll be able to listen for the instructions, and it's very, very important that you follow the instructions. And then afterwards, it's going to move. It's going to move directly into part number 3. And then in part number 3, you'll see the screen, the question pop up on the screen like this. And then you're going to be given 1 minute. You're going to be given 1 minute to take notes. And then after that I'm using a clock. And then after that 1 minute is up for taking notes, then you're going to be given 2 minutes to give your response. Now, as I said, when I give my response, I'm going to give my response actually in Google Docs so that it can keep a written record of my response. So I'm going to actually show you how to do that. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just pause for a second and shift to Google Docs and kind of show you what that looks like. And then afterwards, I'll go back and play it and answer in real time and take my notes in real time and so forth and so on. Okay? All right. Okay, and now we're in Google Docs. And to be able to do the speech-to-text software in Google Docs is really, really, really easy. All you do, you have to have a microphone. You have to have a microphone attached. And the better your microphone, the better this program is going to work. If you're using one of those microphones or headsets that you plan to plug into your cell phone, it may not work as well. But to be able to activate it, you go into Tools, and then you go down to where it says Voice Typing. You click on that for voice typing, and there it is. And to be able to activate it for speaking, you just click on this and it will speak. Today I'm going to give you a really good speech about the type of work that my grandfather used to do. You see that? So you see the way that works? Whatever I'm saying is going to type exactly what I'm saying. So I think this is a really, really good tool for you because you're going to be able to go back and check on your grammar, lexical ability, and your pronunciation, period. So I hope that you will really make this tool a part of your IELTS study, and I'll talk to you really soon. So I'm just giving you an example here, everybody, of the way it works. It really will type what you're saying. Now, if you see, it typed every word that I said. Every word that I said. Now, for you, if it's not typing, if it's missing some words, what that means for you is this is a word that I need to pronounce better. This is a word maybe I'm not saying clearly enough because the system is not picking up on my English to be able to picking up on my English at the same rate as a native speaker. All right. So now we're going to go back, and I'm going to play the video the same way you would play the video. I'm going to start at the point for question number 2, and then I'm going to start from question number 2 and give my answers to question number 2, and then move into giving my answer for question number 3. All righty, so I'll talk to you really soon after I finished. Wish me luck.
All right, so the topic card. Describe a job your grandparents did. Describe a job your grandparents did. Please say, what was it? Was it a difficult job? Did he or she like it? You will now have 1 minute to take notes, and you may begin taking notes now. Okay, your time is up. Please stop taking notes. You will now have 2 minutes to give your response, and you may begin speaking now.
I did not know my grandparents very well in regards to the type of profession that they had when I was growing up. By the time I was old enough to understand, my grandfather, as far as I've been told, was an employee with Ford Motor Company. And his specific line of work was that of what you would call a line worker. This job meant that he and other company employees would literally stand in a line at a factory, and they would take on or take off the doors, mirrors, trunk, or any other part of a car. So this was what he did every day for, I think, 35 or 40 years of his life. Now, from what I understand, this line of work was very, very arduous, nerve-wracking, and tedious. My grandfather would have to do the same repeated motion over and over again. So, as you may know, doing a repeated motion can cause you joint pain or muscle difficulty later in life. So my grandfather did not always walk around in the best comfort. In addition to that, the managers at the company really put a lot of pressure on the employees to be perfect every single time. You have to keep in mind that there were no robots during this time period, and he had to be perfect in what he was doing every single time. My grandfather hated this job. I know this because when he got home from work, every day he would just complain over and over and over how this job was just sucking the life out of him. His attitude most of the time was being grouchy and angry immediately after he got home from work. If I remember correct, my grandfather wanted to be an artist, but because he had to support his family, he was forced to have to go work in the factories. So overall, he did not like it.
Okay, time's up. Please stop. We are now moving on to part number 3. In part number 3, the topic is, of course, jobs. Now, as I said earlier, you should not be looking at the screen right now. Turn your face away from the screen, listen to the question, and answer the question. I'm going to give you about 40 to 50 seconds to respond to the question. Normally, you should be able to give a part 3 response in about 30 to 35 seconds. I'm going to give a little bit more time than that, because I have some people that are at the beginning stage of really working on this exam. Some are more experienced, so I have to give more time. But if you're finishing up in about 35 to 40 seconds, then you're doing a good job. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Here is question number 1. Can all workers be replaced by robots?
Well, if you're talking about any type of employment that involves a certain level of routine, whether it's cognitive or physical, is on the potential chopping block to be substituted with a robot. So, for example, if a person is working, like my grandfather, for a motor vehicle company like Ford or Chevy, their job could be replaced because they're doing the same task over and over and over again. Also, if it's cognitive work, such as that of an accountant, it also will most likely be replaced with robotics.
Okay, please stop. Question number 2. In what jobs can robots replace people easily?
Definitely, if you are right now working for any type of factory, whether it's textile, coal, or the automobile industry, you most likely are going to be substituted with a robot. I'm sorry, but that's what's going to happen because your job is routine. Any work that's doing the same motion repeatedly, a robot can do that. So if you're working also in a cognitive profession, such as an accountant, as I mentioned before, you're going to get replaced very, very easily because a robot can add numbers. They can put numbers into the right sections on a form. So I think that type of work is in the most jeopardy for easy replacement.
Please stop. Final question. What are the advantages or disadvantages of such a replacement?
Well, the drawbacks are obvious because when you look at how robots are going to take the place of thousands and thousands of human jobs, there will be significant job loss for the average Joe. Most people don't realize that their work is on the verge of really being canceled because of automation and machine intelligence. So the major drawback would definitely be job loss. In terms of advantages, what it might do is free human beings up to do more creative efforts because we won't be able to do that manual labor that robots can so easily perform.
All right, please stop. That is the end of the test. On the real exam, at this point, the examiner would shake your hand and wish you a good day, and then they would review their notes on how well you did on all three parts and assess you. Thanks for participating and have a great day.
Okay, so that is what the Google Docs speech-to-text software is. Now, it's not perfect. I can see some of the language and some of the words that I said it didn't quite get, but I can really be able to go back and look at what I'm saying and kind of try to find areas where I can improve. As I said, it's not perfect. I can see it's not getting everything that I'm saying, but I think it's a really good tool for being able to just improve on what you're doing. And what I'll try to do, I'm going to kind of separate this a little bit. Yeah, this was the final question right here. And that was my response. And that was that question in my response. Okay. All right. So I want you to take advantage of this. Now, of course, with the speech to text, we're not putting in punctuation. If you really are using this for other purposes, you can speak and put in punctuation, to stop. But the main thing or the main benefit of this is being able to just work on your grammar, your vocabulary that you're using, and just testing how well you pronounce the words. All right, so thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day. Go ahead and do the next practices for set A, B, C, D. Go ahead and practice doing part 2 and part 3 so that you're able to really self-evaluate or with your study partner, evaluate. Okay, in this video, we're going to be going over a practice set for speaking parts 2 and 3. This will be practice set A. So go ahead and stop the tape right now and make sure you get that in number 2, and then I'm going to give you like it. You will now have in part number 3, the topic is, of course, jobs. Now, as I said earlier, you should not be looking at the screen right now.
Turn your face away from the screen.
Okay, here we have another lecture where I'm going to read parts 2 and 3 together. Again, the purpose of this is for you to be able to work on your pronunciation. What I want you to do is listen and then repeat what I say. Listen and then repeat what I say, because I want you to be able to work on your pronunciation, work on your intonation, work on your chunking, work on your word stress, work on the things that make a difference in your score, okay? Again, this is a pronunciation exercise. All right, this is the question about making decisions. Describe when you had to make a very difficult decision. Again, I'm going to read straight through. So if you want, you can have me just speak for 30 seconds and stop and try to repeat what I said. One major resolution I made in life involved my matriculation from Ghana to the USA to study architecture. Settling on studying in the USA meant I'd have to spend 4 years away from home. Now, living and learning with Americans was not the only option, since universities in Australia and China presented me with full scholarships based upon my past accomplishments. China had to be disregarded due to the language barrier, and Australia was taken out of consideration based upon the distance from my homeland. One other option was to remain at home, but the Accra institutions did not utilize the latest architectural methods. Settling on the USA as my temporary home involved considerations of culture, diversity, and recommendations. Actually, culture played a huge part in the decision. Because I'd grown up watching American movies, I felt that I understood the lifestyle and would have an easier relocation. Naturally, I'd want a diverse experience since my country lacks this aspect. So, the United States being the most diverse country on earth made quite an impression on me. To tell you the truth, the most influence came from my family members who previously graduated from universities in New York and California. That being said, I couldn't deny that leaving home wasn't filled with doubt and considerable reservations. But ultimately, studying abroad in Detroit served me well, taking into account the fact that during my 4-year stay, I produced groundbreaking research on the restoration of ancient West African architectural techniques. I'd have to say that decision was rewarding. This research led to my attaining an excellent position with a top architectural firm that is actually putting my research into real modern-day constructions. Part number 3. What skills are necessary to make good decisions? Off the top of my head, a couple of attributes come to mind. One being an ability to think outside the box. This would enable you to look at a problem from angles that were not previously considered. Also, arranging a pros and cons list, as well as having a deep knowledge of self, would provide considerable aid in coming to a particular conclusion. Last but not least, vision and examining worst-case scenarios help reach rewarding decisions. Do parents in your country allow children to make important decisions? Normally, Ghanaian parents involve themselves in major resolutions that concern their offspring. Because Ghana is more of a collective culture, it will be a rare occasion when a child collective culture, it will be a rare occasion when a child is on their own accord. If this were the USA, children would be given such freedoms, but in Ghana, this attitude is thought to lead to poor outcomes due to lack of wisdom. Do you think parents should make important decisions for their children? Based on what I've just said about Ghanaian parents, yes, all major resolutions should be controlled by a parental figure. Some argue that preventing children from deciding their fate detracts from their ability to make determinations later in life. When you think about it, this line of thought cannot be more wrong, because wisdom leads to good resolutions, and this wisdom is only gained by allowing those that have it to take the lead on significant decisions that need to be reached. Thank you very much, and I hope you do a good job of working on your pronunciation. Okay, in this lecture video, I'm putting parts 2 and 3 together in the same lecture video. Now, the purpose of this lecture video is for you to be able to work on your pronunciation. Okay? This is a pronunciation practice video. Again, this is a pronunciation practice video. One more time. This is a pronunciation practice video. What I mean by that is I'm just going to read through parts 2 and 3 consecutively. I'm going to read through them consecutively. I might take a little bit of pause to catch my breath, but I'm going to read through them consecutively. And what you should do is you can listen to me pronounce all the words, and then afterwards you can go through the lecture yourself and try pronouncing the words the way that I pronounce them, or just do the best you can with your own pronunciation. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. And as I said, I've already taught what's in part 2 and taught what's in part 3. So here, again, I'm just going to read it directly all the way through. And then your job is to stop it along the way and try to say it for yourself, or to let me finish and then you kind of speak it all for yourself also and work on your pronunciation. Okay, let's go. So this one is going to be a read through of the first mobile phone question. And if you need to, you can stop and look at the notes there for a second. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to the next screen and read directly straight through. Describe your first mobile phone. Although I've possessed countless wireless phones over the years due to damage or new model releases, I'll always remember my Nokia 550, the first digital device I ever called my own. I can distinctly remember that I was a high school freshman when I came into possession of, at this time, one of the most technologically advanced field-enabled phones. The typical Bahamian secondary student begins school at 13 or 14 years of age, depending on their birth month. Being that my birth month is February, I was definitely 14 when I was awarded my Nokia 550. I can further confirm this age because my sister received her first phone at 15, and I am 1 year younger than her. As previously stated, I had just started high school when I received this phone, and if my memory serves me, it must have been summer 2000 when I first held this Nokia 550 in my hands. Having only been 14 years of age at this time, I didn't actually purchase the phone myself. Instead, my father had decided to snap up this cellular in a flash sale and present it as a birthday gift. He had informed me the previous year that if I performed well in school, which I did, that he'd furnish me with my first mobile. As I just said, my receipt of this mobile phone occurred on my birthday during the hottest time of the year. I can't put into words the overwhelming excitement that filled my heart after I slowly removed the gift wrapping and saw the words Nokia 550 printed on the outside of the box. I held the box above my head like I had just won an Olympic medal. And for what I've been told, I was actually jumping around like a kangaroo. Immediately after I calmed down somewhat, I dashed out the door and showed the neighbors the new sale. I can't recall word for word what I said on my first call, but it was something like, "Guess where I'm calling you from?" Okay. And now we will move into part number 3 for the mobile phones. Do young and old people use money the same way? Wrong question. That should be, do young and old people use phones the same way? Use phones the same way, everybody. Young adults and their elders distinctly use high-tech cell phones in regards to purpose. Youngsters tend to heavily rely on the latest social media such as Snapchat, TikTok, or Instagram, whereas those who are 40 and up focus mainly on SMS or older social media like Facebook. Generation X and Y purchase a new phone just for the camera, so they are definitely more into the picture capabilities than the baby boomer generation. What are the differences between writing letters and text? Well, the contrast between those two concepts come into play when first considering the length of what is written. You would never write a 1,000-word text, whereas personal letters can easily reach that word count. In addition to the length, we can also see the differences in regards to personalization. What I mean by that is letters have your distinct handwriting, which makes each unique, while a text message is devoid of that identifying marker. Some feel mobile phones are annoying. Can you give examples of how this might be the case? I can definitely speak on this topic, and I'll start with the rude people who have no idea that they are shouting unnecessarily into the phone and thereby disturbing the peace of others. I can remember this one time in the bank, and this woman was literally speaking as if she were yelling across the street to her friend. Another irritating habit that comes to mind is when a person keeps looking at their phone during a personal conversation. I find this to be quite offensive and off-putting. I'll mention one more maddening ritual that I've seen, which is scrolling through social media during a company meeting. All right, thank you very much for joining us. Okay, this is an IELTS speaking live class. This live class will be for parts 2 and 3 of the IELTS speaking exam. The reason why the focus is only on parts 2 and 3 is because last month in June, I did the live class for speaking part 1. And if you missed that live class for speaking part 1, those recordings are already uploaded in the Udemy course in the speaking part 1 section. So if you missed that, you can go back and be able to see it and benefit from it. So as I said, we're going to be going over speaking parts 2 and 3. I'm going to first go over just a brief review about what you really need to do for parts 2 and 3. I'm going to explain it a little bit differently than I do in the normal pre-recorded lectures. And hopefully some of you may benefit by hearing about it in a different kind of way, in a live setting. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat box during the class, and I'll try to address your questions as soon as possible. I might address your question at the end of class, depending on what your question is. Please only ask questions about the specific class topic that we're talking about. Also, during the class, make sure that you keep your video off because that can be a distraction to other students. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go over a couple of brief things about the rubric for parts 2 and 3. It's the same rubric that's used for part 1. It's just that for part 2, the focus is slightly different on different parts of the rubric. And what a lot of students want to know is how to move from a band 6 to a band 7, 8, or 9. A lot of people are stuck on a band 6 or band 6.5, or they're stuck on a band 7 and they want to move to a band 8 or band 9. So let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So for part number 2, in terms of part number 2, which is called the extended speech, really here, what the examiner is really looking at more than anything else would be your fluency and your coherence, because you have to be able to speak for the not the whole 2 minutes, but you really want to finish between 1:50 and 2 minutes. And that's really what your fluency is really based on. Are you able to speak for an extended period of time with minimal pausing and hesitation? And then you see it says fluency and coherence. And coherence is mainly based on the organization of your ideas and the linking words that you're using when you're speaking. And so part number 2 is really the most difficult part of the exam. It's the most difficult part of the exam. And really, it's the part of the exam that usually will make or break a score. Sometimes after a person finishes part number 1, they may be at a band 7 at that time. And then depending on what they do in part number 2, they may fall down into a 6 or 6.5, or they may be able to go up to an 8. So it really depends. In terms of your lexical resource, of course, the more synonyms, paraphrasing, range, and flexibility you use to increase the better your score. And then being accurate in terms of your grammar. So really, when it comes to part number 2, once you start speaking, the only things you really should focus on is your fluency, coherence, and your pronunciation. Whatever grammar you have, once you start speaking, that's what you're going to use. Don't think about it. Whatever vocabulary you have, you're not going to be able to think about, okay, I need to use a paraphrase here. I need to use a synonym here. Don't worry about those things while you're speaking, because if you worry about those things while you're speaking, you're going to mess up your fluency and coherence, and you're going to mess up your pronunciation. And so just be aware. But in part 3, you're going to really speak in maybe 2 to 3 sentences or 2 to 4 sentences. So part number 3 really requires a lot more depth, So really, if you're able to extend and explain very well for part number 3 and show that you can answer specific questions about a specific topic or subject, then you're going to be able to score very well. All right, and in terms of how to improve, record yourself and keep a record. That's one of the best things you can do. I know we don't like to listen to ourselves on tape and listen to recordings of ourselves, but the more you record yourself and keep a record, the better you're going to be able to improve. Keeping a record works for every part of the exam. So for example, if somebody's doing the reading section, one of the worst things a person can do is just jump from practice test to practice test, which probably 90% of you are doing. And really what you're supposed to do is when you finish a reading passage, for example, you should have a table or chart in front of you, keeping a record of the questions you got wrong, the question types you got wrong, why you got that question type wrong, not keeping a record, a recording of what you're doing doesn't allow for you to make improvements. Students always students ask me several times, I'm not doing well in my reading. I'm not doing well in my listening. I'm not doing well in my speaking. My first question is, are you keeping well, why? I don't know. Well, what answers are you getting wrong? I don't know. That means you don't have a record, right? You don't have a record. And so, keeping a record works for everything, for reading, for listening, for writing, right? Keeping a record, you should be keeping records, having tables and keeping records. So that's critical, all right? If you want to get better with your fluency and pronunciation, speak English consistently in detail. The more English you speak, the more familiar the words are going to be to you. Then, of course, the more you improve your vocabulary and your grammatical range, the easier every section of the exam is going to be, not just speaking, but reading also. The more grammar you have, the better you understand sentence structure, the easier it's going to be. So, this is how you improve, not just in speaking. Some of this applies to speaking, speaking English consistently, but the keeping a record and improving your vocabulary and grammatical range applies to all areas. All right, so before I jump to the next thing, does anyone have any questions that I can address or answer on anything that I've talked about so far? Great, then let's go ahead and move on. All right, so now let's look at speaking parts 2 and 3 and just look at a snapshot of both of them very quickly. So as you know, for part 2, you're going to get a cue card and the question will look something like this. Talk about a toy from your childhood that you liked the most. Please say, what was it? Who gave it to you? When did you get it? Explain what you liked about it. Now, these are guidelines for you to be able to create a coherent statement. They're guidelines, right? They're guidelines. Now, some people have asked me in the past, well, what if I only get to the first 3? That's fine. You could actually still get a really good score. But these are guidelines to be able to create a coherent response. Because a lot of people, if they just ask you the question, talk about a toy from your childhood that you like the most, that would, if they just ask you that question without guidelines, that's basically a TOEFL IBT question for speaking part 1 of the TOEFL or task 1 of the TOEFL IBT. On the TOEFL IBT, they would just ask you this question, talk about a toy from your childhood that you like the most, and then give you 15 seconds to prepare and you deliver a response in 45 seconds. They give you no guidelines. Basically, for part number 2, of the IELTS exam is like a TOEFL Part 1 speaking question, but they actually are giving you time to outline your answer in detail, 1 minute, as opposed to 15 seconds. And they're telling you, these are some things you can talk about to be able to give a coherent response. And then for part number 3, you can see these are the types of discussion questions that they would ask you about this topic about toys. Now, for part number 2, you get to see the cue card and you get to keep your notes in front of you that you take. For part number 3, you don't see the questions. It's just like part number 1. You don't see the questions. So for those 8 volunteers that I have today, Pavan, Shivam, Arjun, all my 8 volunteers, when you're volunteering, you can look at the computer screen and look at part 2, but when I'm asking the part 3 questions, please simulate the exam and don't look at the screen, right? Do not look at the screen for part number 3. All right, so that's going to be able to simulate the actual exam. All right, I have 3 questions I'm going to look at very quickly and then move on. How much time should I speak in part 2 to get a band 7? Between 1 minute and 50 seconds and 2 minutes. How can we make it easy? Cue card, I don't know what you mean by that. Are you asking about notes? If you're asking about note taking, I explained that in the speaking part 2 section in the course. Will they tell you to stop talking? Yeah, they'll tell you to stop talking after the 2 minutes are done. All right, they're going to tell you to stop talking. All right, so I went over this already somewhat for part number 2. You're going to get a topic card with 3 to 5 bullet points. You have 1 minute to prepare. You speak for 2 minutes. Part number 2, the purpose of it is they're testing your ability to organize and sequence information. They're testing your fluency and pronunciation, and also testing, can you speak for an extended, uninterrupted period of time? That's the purpose of part 2. Those are the overall big purposes of part number 2. Organization, sequencing, fluency, pronunciation, and extended speaking. Now, of course, there are the other scores in terms of grammar and lexical ability. In part number 2, somebody just asked me about how do you keep notes. You can make a grid on the piece of paper in terms of your note taking. You know, like this question here, describe something you own which is very important to you. You should say where you got it, 1, 2, 3, how long, 1, 2, 3, what was it? What did you use it for? 1, 2, 3. Why was it important to you? 1, 2, 3. That's what note taking can look like. You can do a horizontal grid or do a vertical grid, but having your notes in front of you allows for you to give an organized, coherent response. Speaking without notes in front of you can be tricky. It can be difficult because, you know, you don't want to just be rambling. They're looking for somebody that can speak in an organized sequence kind of way. All right, Mr. Singh, you can't go beyond 2 minutes. You understand? You can't. You're not able to. You're in a live speaking section. So at 2 minutes, that examiner is going to tell you, stop, you're done, you're finished, stop, right? They're not going to let you keep talking. You're done. All right, so in terms of structuring a response for part number 2, a structured response might look something like this. You might have 1 sentence to introduce what you're talking about. And then for each of those discussion points, you want to have between 2 and 3 sentences, depending on the amount of discussion points that you have. But, you know, once you have said 2 or 3 sentences about a discussion point, you can go ahead and move on to the next discussion point that you have. All right, then move on to the next discussion point that you have. The purpose of the guidelines, the purpose of those guidelines is to give you the ability to flow and move on from one point to another point, right? That's how you show fluence. That's how you show sequencing, organization, and being able to give a coherent response, right? This is what a coherent response might seem like when you're talking about part number 2. This is directly from ETS. I mean, not ETS, from IELTS, IELTS IDP. This is a sample response from them. You can see that they basically give their one or two sentence introduction, and then they go through talking about each discussion point, right? So they really start at the first bullet point, and then they just keep going in a logical, coherent way. Now, this is an example of a bad response. And the reason why I put this here is because, you need to understand that these are guidelines. They're not questions you're answering. Some students mess up because they look at this and they're trying to answer a question, right? You're not just answering a question. These are discussion guidelines, right? Discussion guidelines. There's a difference between discussion guidelines and answering a question. So you don't have just a series of one sentence answers. Okay, so that's sometimes where people are messing up their score. All right, so for part number 2, remember to extend and explain your details, express your thoughts and feelings. The truth doesn't matter. Some people tell me, well, what if I don't know about this? Or what if I don't have this experience? The truth doesn't matter. Your storytelling. Think of it in terms of telling a story. Now, part number 3, that should be related to part 2, not related to part 3. It's related to part number 2, right? These questions will be related to the same topic as part 2. They're going to ask you about 3 to 5 questions, and they're testing your ability to answer questions with more lexical and grammatical difficulty. That's what they're testing in part 3. In part 3, you definitely want to expand and extend your answers. Try your best to use subject-specific vocabulary. When you're able to use subject-specific vocabulary, that really helps increase your lexical score. Use contractions, right? This is when you're doing the speaking part, it's informal, not formal. It's informal. So you wouldn't say, I have been. You would say, I've been. You wouldn't say, I am not. You would say, I'm not. So using contractions, adjective collocations is very, very important. Please use a variety. If you're using discourse markers, use a variety of them. I'm tired of hearing actually 10 times, right? Don't keep just saying actually. All right, there's one question. We're going to get to the samples. All right, somebody asked me, is it compulsory to speak a subject question in part number 2? No, I talked about this earlier. If they give you 4 bullet points and you only get to 3 bullet points, that's fine, right? That could be fine. It's not, like I said, these are guidelines. Now, most students really need all 4 of the bullet points to be able to fill up 2 minutes, right? To be able to fill up a full 2 minutes. So that's why we teach it that way. But they specifically call them guidelines, okay? And there's a reason why they use that word. That was a question from Patel. And Patel, if you all ask a question, don't ask the question directly to me as a private message. Ask the question in the box so everybody can see your question. Okay, I'm answering your question, Patel, and nobody has context. All right, so now we're going to go through some samples. And the way that the sample is going to work, I'm going to be going through parts 2 and 3 with each one of my 8 volunteers. Remember, as a volunteer, I've told you for part number 2, you can look at my screen and see the card. For the 8 volunteers that I have, make sure you have paper in front of you, pencil in front of you, because you have to be able to take notes, right? So, and when we get to part number 3, do not look at the computer screen, all right? I want you to really simulate. When I call on your name, I'm going to activate, I'm going to ask you to unmute your mic, and you need to turn on your microphone and turn on your video, right? Now, for those of you that are listening, if you want to practice speaking for yourself, you know, you can turn off or mute the audio, and you can practice to yourself. You can practice with yourself or practice to yourself giving a response, right? You can sit there right now, you can take notes, and you can practice giving your own response. One thing that I would suggest you do if you're practicing at home and giving your own response while the volunteer is giving their response is it's a good idea to record what you're saying, or to really use a great application like Otter AI, OTTER.ai. It's a great application that will transcribe what you're saying. That really gives you an opportunity to see your language and see what you're doing, see what you're saying. And so you have the option, for those of you that are not volunteering, of speaking on your own and recording yourself so you can look at your own work. For those of you that are just listening to what the person is saying, I want you to please act as a peer checker. And what that means is listening to the person's part 2 and part 3 response, and then giving feedback on what you think about their pronunciation, fluency, and coherence, lexical ability, and grammar ability. So, for those of you just listening, please, you can take notes in front of you and just keep a record of what you think about their responses. Keep in mind, we're here to learn from each other and listen to each other. Now, for these first 4 samples, after the volunteer gives their response, then I'm also going to give a recorded response of mine so you can hear what my response to part number 2 would sound like. And I'm doing that for the first 4 questions, All right, so Pavan, I'm going to take you through parts 2 and 3 exactly on the exam. You're going to do part 2, and then we're going to move directly into part 3.
Okay.
Right? You're going to see, I'm going to have a clock on the screen in terms of the 1 minute to prepare and the 2 minutes to speak. You're going to see it when I get to the question. And I'm doing that for teaching purposes. On the actual exam, they're not going to give you a clock to look at. I'm just doing that so everybody can see the time. Okay. All right. And then after you finish part 2 and part 3, the peer checkers will give feedback, and I'll try to give feedback too. But it's difficult for me to give you feedback while I'm giving you the exam. I'm doing both at the same time. But Pavan, if you're ready, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So this is set number 1. All right, Pavan, here is your cue card over here on the left. You can see your cue card right here. Talk about a toy from your childhood that you liked the most. Please say, what was it? Who gave it to you?
Okay, guys, let's conclude today's speaking sessions. We should be practicing more on our own, and let's see you tomorrow with more practice for all the 4 papers from tomorrow. We have 10 more days to concentrate and give the complete paper, so let's do it together. Thank you.